guys, what on earth happened to all the young adult dystopian books? It seems like young adult dystopian hit its peak in 2006 to 2012, and then it just disappeared. Books like The Hunger Games, Divergent, Noughts and Crosses, and The Maze Runner all brought about a wave of young adult dystopian books that hit all the marks. Books that were so popular, they were turned into films, which were also huge successes. So if dystopian was so popular, why did it phase out? And why was it so popular in the first place? Well, today we find out, and I'm also going to share with you why I think a new wave of young adult dystopian books is incoming. Dystopian fiction is a form of science fiction which explores a world in which society has broken down and human misery in some form exists. Many dystopian novels contain exaggerated concepts of societal divisions, mass surveillance of citizens, and post-apocalyptic events, whether by nature or man-made. These themes reflect troubling events, societal norms, and general concepts that are happening in our society today. Dystopian fiction is popular because of this mirroring. We see normal events that are happening in our daily lives brought to life in a more extreme version in dystopian novels. They're commentary on society, and yet they're kind of entertaining. So if dystopian fiction reflects everything that's going on in our society today, then what exactly was going on in the early 2000s that brought about a new wave of young adult dystopian fiction? In October of 2002, the US Congress granted President Bush the power to decide whether to launch a military attack in Iraq. His decision was yes. And as a result, the Iraq War began on the 20th of March, 2003. While the war was raging in Iraq, Suzanne Collins was flipping through TV stations between footage of the Iraq War and reality TV programs, and an idea for The Hunger Games was born, one that was based on the just war theory. In Suzanne's words, just war theory attempts to define what circumstances give you the moral right to wage war, and what is acceptable behaviour within that war and its aftermath. It helps differentiate between what's considered a necessary and an unnecessary war. This concept, coupled with themes of corruption, human rights, slave labour, rebellion, and of course reality TV, combine to create The Hunger Games. On the 22nd of April 1993, Stephen Lawrence, a black British teenager from Plumstead, southeast London, was murdered in a racially motivated attack while waiting for a bus in Eltham. He was 18 years old. This event shone a harsh light on the British police service and its inbuilt institutional racism. It took 19 years for two of the perpetrators to be convicted, and 1 year later, a former undercover cop confirmed allegations of corruption. He had been pressured to find ways to smear and discredit the victim's family in order to mute and deter public campaigning for better police response to the case. Watching the emotional case unfold, Mallory Blackman felt a connection. It was like the Stephen Lawrence case in particular. I was watching a docudrama and I was just so appalled at the way the family had been treated. But it wasn't just the Stephen Lawrence case that gave Mallory the urge to create a dystopian novel. Race and racism are emotive issues that most people are loath to discuss, but I think they should be discussed, no matter how painful. Using her own experiences and this case as fuel, Mallory Blackman created Noughts and Crosses, a young adult dystopian novel that flips racism on its head. And boy, does it have impact. The City of Ember was inspired by the threat of nuclear war in the 1950s and was released in 2003. Uglies was inspired by changing beauty standards and what it meant to take it too far. It was released in 2005. Matched was inspired by the idea of a government-devised algorithm that matched people into romantic pairs and the fallout of that. It was released in 2010. I could go on, but you get the point. Within this 10 to 12 year period, dystopian was incredibly popular. It wasn't just that a load of dystopian was being released, it was that a load of dystopian was being read. So what happened? Do people read a lot less dystopian now? Do they not enjoy it as much as they once did? In reality, there are no fewer young adult dystopian books being released. In fact, there are plenty to choose from, but there are a few things standing in their way. First, young adult dystopian has a lot to live up to. Readers can't help themselves. They'll compare books to each other even if they don't mean to. Which means if a reader enjoyed a particular popular dystopian novel from the dystopian wave, say The Hunger Games, they're probably going to compare it to a more recent release if it contains similar themes. Even The Hunger Games got compared to other dystopian novels when it came out. Which means newer young adult dystopian novels have quite the hill to climb because readers have certain expectations. Just as any children's fantasy author has to avoid writing a plot that's too similar to Harry Potter, young adult dystopian novels have to avoid writing plots that are similar to young adult dystopian books that have already come out, which is kind of hard to do when dystopian as a genre reflects our society today. And secondly, the world-altering events that have happened since the wave up until fairly recently have potentially not been impactful enough to inspire dystopian writers. It's clear that in the early 2000s there was some pretty huge world-changing events that happened, and it only took one of those events to inspire somebody to write a young adult dystopian novel that was popular, for then publishers to jump on the trend and release a bunch of other dystopian books that rode along that same wave. So if young adult dystopian comes in waves, here's why I think a new wave is coming. In the last 10 years, we've had some pretty huge world-defining events that have not been positive, that may inspire up-and-coming or existing authors to have their voice heard through the medium of young adult dystopian. Events such as countless climate change disasters, the pandemic, Brexit, Donald Trump, the Hong Kong protests, the murder of George Floyd, the Ukraine war, and so much more. Young adult novels in general have never been more popular than they are right now. 2006 to 2012 was when I was a young adult, and dystopian books were my absolute jam. And now we have a new wave of actual young adults coming in, ones that are very in tune to modern events and what is happening in the world. It's also been a good number of years since the last wave, and readers have had a long time to take a breather. Even Suzanne Collins recently released another Hunger Games book, which to me says publishers are ready and waiting for the next wave. But you tell me, do you think there's a new wave of young adult dystopian fiction coming out? And if so, are you excited about it? Let me know in the comments. And if you love this video on young adult dystopian fiction, here's another video that you might also like, also about young adult fiction. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.